Mr. Vellayan Subbiah, Chairman of Cholamandalam Investment and Finance Company Limited and Executive Vice Chairman of Tube Investments of India Limited, has over 2 decades of experience in consulting, technology, projects and financial services. An alumnus of IIT Madras and the University of Michigan, Mr. Vellayan has held leadership roles at McKinsey, 24/7 Customer Incorporated, and Sundaram Fasteners. He is a recipient of the EY World Entrepreneur of the Year 2024, EY Entrepreneur of the Year 2023 and Tycon's Extraordinary Entrepreneur of the Year 2014.
Namaskaram. Morning, everybody. So I actually think Navneet gave me a great platform for what I'm going to talk to you all about today. When we think about resilient India, we really have to think of both what India needs to do and how we need to do it, right? And so we should spend a little time talking about both, right? So first, I'm just going to show you a slide which talks about. So first off, maybe I kind of ask a couple of questions around what Navneet said, right? Navneet said 2% of global goods trade happens from India, 4% of global services trade happens from India, right, of the total 32 trillion. So first let me ask you, what percentage of you, right, work for companies that export either more than 50% of their goods or service? Hey, raise your hands or something. I don't want this to be a monologue. So there are 4 of you, 5 of you in the room. So let me ask you, what percentage of companies export less than 50% of their goods and service? So what do the rest of you do? Some total should be about 100, no? So can we try again? I want a bit of a response here. So you're saying very few of you work for companies that export 50% of your goods and services from here. I think it's a very valid thing to think about, right? First off, as a country, if we only focus on the domestic economy, I don't think we're focusing enough on what can build a resilient country, right? If India has to be resilient, we have to think of how we export a lot more. And that is step number 1. The second thing is, we need to think about what we export, right? So this is a slide that basically talks about what product companies do and what service companies do, right? This has basically a price to earnings multiple of all the product companies on the left. Apple, Nvidia, Microsoft, all the famous ones you've heard of, Alphabet, Meta. And then you've got service companies on the right? All very successful, all companies out of India. But one thing that you basically see is that when you look at the market caps that you can get off of a product company and the market caps that you can get off of a service company, the ratio is basically on the right side, pale. Right? Is that fair? Yeah. It would be good if you all respond also, because otherwise I'm worried first thing in the morning that everybody's not had enough coffee or I'm getting too boring to talk to. But what do you think? Do you see kind of a huge difference between product and service companies? The slide? Yeah. So we need to start thinking, see, fundamentally what India has been very good at is building service companies, right? And when Navneet talked about it, he said we're 4% of global services trade. But it's very interesting to think of what we are doing, right? I mean, India is now building a lot of GCCs, and I'll come to the next slide about the approach of different countries, right? But what is very interesting is that basically we are exporting our services, basically we're exporting our people to the world at a particular markup, right? The markup could be 20%, the markup could be 15%, whatever it is, right? Could be, but it's not in too many cases exceeding, like I would say, a 25% markup. With most of you, and I know Lakshmi, we've got kind of experts here on the services side, but roughly markup will be 20 to 25%, right? Now, what do you think kind of the markup is on NVIDIA's GPU? Can we get some answers, responses? Group captain, you've not given them enough coffee in the morning, clearly. Huh? So we'll pick, huh? Gave them coffee. So what do you think? What do you think? What do you think? You can just shout out your answer. What do you think the margins are on kind of some of the products on the left? 75, 100%, 80%. So gross margins on these products are insane, right? And we need to think about this because India, I would say, the biggest kind of challenge we've got is that we've got caught in this in this thing where we provide services to the world, right? And what is really interesting, right? How many of you use either in your companies either Gmail or Microsoft as your mail service provider? All of you, right? Pretty much everybody's hands going up. Do you know where Microsoft's mail product and Gmail got written? Hyderabad, Bangalore, okay, some combination of Hyderabad and Bangalore. What did India get for it? Salary of employees, maybe plus some 10% if we charge them taxes properly or something like that, right? How much do you think when who's negotiated with Microsoft or Google when they come to negotiate with you for pricing? I've negotiated with them at the other end, okay? What margin do they sell the product back to us at? 70% plus gross margin. We have to think what we're doing, right? As a country, right, we're selling our people at a 10 to 15% markup, and we're buying the product back at a 70% markup. Is this considered kind of good business buddhi or not? Huh? So we really need to think about this as a country, which is basically, if we need to think of what we're going to do to get more competitive, more resilient as a country, this path is not going to get us there in the long term, right? So getting proud about how many more people we've got at GCCs. By the way, I'll give you a small story, right? It is my genuine desire that we kind of change this for India, right? And so, there's the same story in the world of semiconductors, okay? So we basically are making a semiconductor packaging facility to basically to manufacture the semiconductors here, right? But where is 60% of the margins of semiconductors? No. So where is, if you think of a semiconductor value chain, where does the 60% of the margins come from? The design of the semiconductors, right? So now, if you take every large semiconductor company in the world, you take NXP, Broadcom, Infineon, Texas Instruments, Qualcomm, anybody you say, they'll have a GCC in India with at least 8,000 people, maybe 10,000 people in it. So where are those chips getting designed, just like Microsoft's mail and Google's mail? Where are those chips getting designed? In India, by Indian engineers. Okay. How much do we get on those chips? On those people who design them? 10% markup. How much do we buy these chips back at? By the way, it's a second highest import item on our import bill after oil, like Josh knows. How much are we buying these chips back at? Basically at the 75%, 80% gross margins. We have to really think about this. So basically what I said is, hey, listen, this is crazy. Let's go and try and see if we can start a semiconductor design company. So we just bought, the transaction's not closed, but it's in public domain. We're waiting for CFIUS, which is, so we bought the radio frequency division of a Japanese chip maker called Renesas, which is predominantly based in the US, right? So we bought that division. By the way, that division has, over 60% of its employees in Bangalore, and but the rest of the 30% are in the US, and 10% are the rest of the world. Now, the interesting thing is that the 30% that are in the US, of those employees, 80% are Desis. Okay. So now we had to go and pay in dollars to an international company to buy an organization that is basically 90% Desi. Okay. And what we have to think of is, this is what we're doing with our intellectual property, right? And unless we start thinking of how we change this, I don't believe we can really kind of be a resilient nation in the long term. We have to think of our trajectory, right? So this is an interesting slide because it basically shows how China went about it, right? And I think that the Chinese approach has just really been thought through so much more deeply and in so much more of a structured fashion than the approach we're taking, right? I'm actually kind of quite amazed that we're just happy kind of charging ourselves, marking ourselves up by 10%, right? And then effectively kind of buying back intellectual property. But you just should look at how they've started dominating world trade. And honestly, like we know, no other country dominates world trade like China does today. Right? How have they gone about it? Right? And basically, you got to just look at the three phases, okay? First, they started off by becoming the world's factory, right? And honestly, even this stage, right, I would say India is still in its infancy on, right? I mean, I think, what Josh and some of the others have done in terms of the electronic sector is quite amazing, right? But still, we're importing 95% of the components that go into that sector, right? So we've basically become an assembly house, right? But systematically, they said they become the world's factory over those 20 years. Then they basically looked at how they're going to climb the value chain, right? And what's interesting is this, you can see the basic shifts in terms of their share of world output, okay? They went from 8.4% to 21.9% of world output when they made that shift. And now they've entered the phase of basically developing deeply indigenous technology, right? How many of you were at that Bharat Mobility Expo in Delhi? From Chennai, I would have expected more people because so many people in the mobility industry. Nobody went there? Okay. It was fascinating. I went and saw this BYD stall. Now, BYD is making cars that they're selling into India with effectively a 25% duty, and they're selling them at cheaper than Indian prices. Right? And by the way, these cars are, how many of you have seen a BYD car? A lot of you. Do you think it's good quality, bad quality? Amazing quality, right? Do you think it's good technology, bad technology? Good technology. So now they've actually got world class in terms of technology, world class in terms of quality. Because always we used to say, China, they keep subsidizing, they've got rotten quality, they can't compete with everybody else. They've got world class quality, they've got world class technology, right? And they're doing it at a price where they can import into India and beat Indian prices. So what do you think will happen to the Indian auto industry if we just basically opened our borders and said China can come in? Huh? Finished. Okay? So we really need to think about this, right? Because is protectionism going to be our approach to compete? You can't build a resilient world if protectionism is our approach to compete, right? So fundamentally, unless we say, what are we going to do? How much are we investing? See, by the way, the profit pool in an automobile has moved away from metal. It has moved into the electronics in the automobile, right? Why are they being able to be so dominant? Because they are able to produce the electronics in an automobile much, much cheaper, right, than India can. How much are we investing, right? We're trying to make we're making electric vehicles in India now. Pretty much all the electronics, right? All the control units. We can't get them in India. Nobody is making them in India. So we have to think of how we're going to move from becoming a service nation to a product nation. If that shift does not happen, right, I don't think there is a path of resilience for us, right? So it's fundamentally something that the country needs to think of. And when we say the country needs to think of it, who needs to think of it? Huh? All of us, right? We are industry, we are management. So the fundamental question I have is, what are each of us going to do to change, right? Because if we don't go out and change our companies, right, I do not think there's a long-term chance for resilience in this country if we don't go out and fundamentally change what we are doing in our companies today. If we're just going to continue to do what we're doing, I do not think we're going to be able to build any resilience in our countries. So I actually think this journey actually then comes back to us and you, and what are each one of you going to do to basically change things. And in this, I just want to, oops, it didn't build, the whole thing built up too quickly, sorry. I think maybe we didn't have the build settings right. I want to kind of talk about a very individual journey on this, right? Because actually I think that if India has to compete and win in the world, we cannot compete the same way that the West has competed, right? And I don't think we should even try to compete. Why? Because I feel that India has a technology that we have not actually leveraged. It is probably the biggest technology that India has, and we've not leveraged it to basically create a different way of competing. Okay? So this curve should have, these charts should have actually built up. But this is a totally individual question, right? So the question is purely, so I'll tell you what's on the left of the curve is benefit, right? So if I ask you all at an individual level, what would you say is your objective in life? What are the benefits? What is your objective in life? Some of you, what are your answers? What's your objective in life? Huh? To evolve, to grow. Okay, now this is easy because I got evolution on one part of this chart here. But if you just thought of what is your objective in life, what are we trying to, when we're in this planet, in this lifetime, what are we trying to be? What do you see as kind of your objectives? Sorry? Excellence. Excellence in what you do. Other things? Reach our potential. What else? Do something meaningful. Anything else? Think out of the box. So all of you talking about actions, right? In terms of objectives, right? Would you say like happiness, joyfulness, state of mind, all of that is important as well? Yeah? So basically whatever you look at, as if you say like happiness, joyfulness, or some state of mind is important, and you say that's on the left, right? What I'd like you all to think of is that there are ways of getting there, right? So one of the ways, obviously, is like we all get into our jobs and hopefully kind of make a bit of money in the process, right? But I have a question for you, right? In that process of making money, when you first got your first whatever, right? When I graduated from IIT, I got a job. And it paid, 3,000 rupees. And I was absolutely thrilled when I got my first paycheck, right? How many of you were thrilled when you got your first paycheck? All of us were thrilled when we got our first paycheck. So now, what happened after that? Did your objective function and how much money you wanted to make go up? Were you really happy when you got when 3,000 rupees? Actually, it was quite a bit. Could live pretty well. The next 3,000 rupees you make, did it make you equally happy or a bit less happy? Bit less happy. So actually what you realize is you get caught on a curve that is a diminishing return curve, right? And this has been fundamentally the way that, now we've learned, which is actually, I think, kind of a more Western view, that you get caught on this curve that is a diminishing return curve. Now what's interesting is that the other curve, okay, the curve of evolution, right? The way I look at it is actually an exponential curve. And this has been a curve that is more traditional to the way we've done it in India, right? Which is we keep investing in ourselves. And we have to think of what are we doing to improve ourselves, right? A lot of people said the objective of this life is to improve ourselves, right? And fundamentally, I think if we don't work enough to improve ourselves, we don't have a chance to improve the companies we're in. We don't have a chance to improve the country we're in. Right? If we want to build a resilient India, it actually has to start with ourselves. What is the famous Vivekananda quote? He said, give me 100 people and I will change the nation. But it started with saying, we need a certain percentage of the population. Vivekananda said 100 people. We need a certain percent of the population that recognizes that we need to change ourselves first if we're going to change the organizations we work with, if we're going to change the country, right? And only in India do we have the mechanisms and the tools to basically change ourselves, right, in a fundamental way. And if we really think of what we're going to do, I think that this is a core technology, because right now I feel we're just adopting too many technologies, just blindly taking them from the West. The West has a lot of power, the West has a lot of potential, but we should learn what we adopt from the West and what we inculcate from what we have in the East. And this potential, the way of improving our own selves, is a technology that we only have in the East, right? And so really thinking of how we do that, because if we don't do that as individuals, I don't think we have a chance to basically change either, the companies we work for, what those companies do, or actually making India a resilient country, right? So I genuinely believe that this journey starts with each one of you, with each one of us. And if we really want to build a resilient country, I think it's important that all of you go back home this evening and say, what are each one of us going to do to improve ourselves? Because everything starts with us, right? And kind of starting ourselves on that journey, I think is fundamental. If we start with that, we make India more of a product nation, I definitely believe that we'll achieve this resilience. Thank you. Namaskaram.